6, but it's actually at 7. So I feel like there's a decent chance I can go home, finish packing, and still make it.
You left early last night. You should have packed last night.
I was watering till 12:30.
Oh. Watering? Oh, flowers and stuff? You could hire a neighbor or something.
Welcome, everybody. I'll call this Thursday, June 29th, 2023, Council Chambers City Hall meeting to order. I'd like to acknowledge that we are holding this on the traditional territories of the Quaman Nation. And we would start with the adoption of the agenda. Moved by Councillor Isaacson, second by Councillor Southcott. All in favor? Unanimous. Move to staff reports. 2.1, governance and meetings.
Good afternoon, Council. Normally, I just do a very high-level, quick overview of a report, but this one I think needs to go into a bit more depth. So I prepared a bit of a PowerPoint, and hopefully we can go through that. And if it's okay with the mayor, I'll take questions as they arise, and also at the end, of course. And the format of this follows more or less the way it's written in the report, as well as the attached draft policy. So today, really just talk about the council member liaison appointments to external community groups. Hi, Paul. Discontinuance of portfolios to internal departments and areas of service delivery, formal dissolution of the Finance Committee, and overview of possible next steps on governance changes. So, attached to the report is draft content of what could form a council liaison appointment policy. It's there for information, it's there for critical analysis, for editing. It is not done by any means. It's really an opportunity to workshop it and see if it hits the mark for you. The purpose of the policy would be to provide direct connections and facilitate communication between council and community groups on matters of mutual interest. This would be achieved through an individual council member being appointed as a liaison to that community group. And just as a caveat, members of council, of course, could always continue to volunteer or be involved in any community group of your choosing. It's just that the official liaison would only be that one appointed by the majority of council. So within the policy, we could identify specific community groups in which a liaison is appointed. That way there's absolute clarity on which groups we're talking about at any point in time and who the member of council appointed to it is. This list could be updated as needed. It's not a big undertaking to update the policy. It would simply be a council motion to appoint someone or to remove someone, and it's just done by default. Additional liaison appointments could also be considered by council through written requests from the community group. And the suggestion in the policy is that would include, say, a terms of reference or some kind of a constitution or a bylaw or guiding document, so you understand what it is that community group is trying to achieve. And as well, individual members of council may identify a group in which you feel there should be a connection that's a bit more robust and specific than just an ad hoc connection. And of course, the term community groups, we have to define it in a manner, and it's really quite broad in meaning. So it's any organization, any business, nonprofit, government agency, etc. So it's not just reserved to just a community association, for example. It could be much broader than that. So what to think about when appointing a liaison to a community group. I've caught 5 ideas here. One would be the city's jurisdictional limits and the community group's expectations of the liaison. So that jargon really just gets to, is this if there's, for example, I don't know, an MRI machine at the hospital and everybody wants to lobby for that, well, if there's a community group in which council thinks, oh, we should be part of that, well, the question would be, well, is that within council's jurisdiction? What is the role? Maybe that is a good opportunity for a liaison or advocacy, but really that's for you to decide. Is that where you want to put all the effort? Maybe a letter would serve, maybe others kind of meeting with the minister. There's other ways to do it. Alignment and mutual interest of both the city and the community group mandates and goals. The appointments impact on the city's ability to deliver strategic priorities, and that's in reference just to workload and expectations. And I don't refer to staff there specifically, I'm talking about you. Every member of council is carrying a heavy load, and what is reasonable for you as a member of council to contribute and what's realistic for what you're able to offer to all these community groups. Which ties in the next one, availability and the capacity of council to accommodate additional appointments. And this final one is kind of this delineating subjective threshold. So right now, community groups can come to council, they can be a delegation, they can write letters, they can invite members of council to events. All these things can happen right now. So the question is, do you feel as council that there should be more frequent, more robust, and more direct communication between council and that community group? That's what we're trying to sort out. So that one is really just a thought for council members to consider when they get a request or when they're thinking themselves about bringing something forward. So what is the expectations of you as a council member being a liaison? Well, first, it has to be done by a majority vote of council. And just on that, you could change that. You could make it a 2/3 vote if you wanted it to be more rigorous. But a majority vote, that's typical of the expectations. When you're assigned to the community group, you are a non-voting person on that group. You do not participate in the deliberation, the debate, and whatever's going on at the community group. And in part, one of the reasons why that is important is the hats that you're wearing. If you're a member of a community group, then your duty, your responsibility is to that community group. And as a member of council, if you are sitting on that community group as a member, then you've got this dual role, this dual relationship. And who is it? Are you supporting the community group or actually you're responsible for council? So that's why we're trying to separate that out to make it clear. Of course, we'll not make any commitments on behalf of council or city staff on matters that are not aligned with the strat plan or that are outside of the current policy or previously approved levels of service. However, when you listen, you may have ideas and thoughts and you say, wow, that's something that I could bring back to council and seek a motion on, or I'll go back to the CAO and just see where the status of, if it's a neighborhood association, what's the status of that road being rehabilitated or the potholes filled. So you go back and you can find those questions and get answers to those questions. So some of the other responsibilities are really to facilitate the communication between the community group and council on matters of mutual interest. And I know that's repetitive, but it's bit by design to repeat some terms to try and emphasize what it is we're trying to achieve here. And attending community group meetings as time and scheduling permits and where the agenda topics are of mutual interest. And it's also there to provide updates both ways to council, to the community group regarding events and initiatives. So when you're at the community group, talk about, hey, we're doing a community event down at the harbor. You know, we're looking for all sorts of folks to come down and tell us what they'd like to see for the vision of the harbor, and vice versa. There's a neighborhood association doing an event. You can bring that to the council table, as you do now with your community engagement reports. And that's where that would reside. You'd have that opportunity to talk about it. So organizations not subject to the policy. What I mean by this is because these are legislated, they're by bylaw, they're by some form of governance requirements in which you are a voting member. So this policy would not apply to the regional district, the library board, community forest, because of that. You are the sole shareholder, parcel tax roll review panel, etc. These are ones in which the policy doesn't apply because you obviously have to be more participating and deliberative in the discussions. So, identify community groups. This is what I know so far, and it's limited. But it's according to your current, the current appointment structure, as well as well, let's just jump into it. BC Ferry Advisory Committee, Councillor Palm, Community Advisory Group to Western Stillwater Island Timberlands. I think I could read the mayor's mind here, and I think you're saying that's Councillor Elliott that's on it. So thank you, Mayor, for pointing that out. Yes, that was original, and it changed in a couple of weeks, and staff were about 6 months behind on updating that form. The staff meaning me. So thank you for catching that, Your Worship, and Councillor Elliott. Community Futures Development Corporation, Councillor Elliott. Sunshine Coast Tourism and Tourism Powell River, both Councillor Almeida. These largely follow their former portfolio format. That's why they're grouped as they are. And I'm just identifying that that's who you are. You may want to change those councils. It's up to you. But wait, there are more that I am aware of. We just don't have specific appointments. So here's some potential groups. Gazette Community Action Team through LIFT, Social Housing Advisory Committee through LIFT, Community Advisory Committee, Supportive Housing Facility through LIFT. Oh, what the heck, why not just say LIFT Community Services generally? And we have the SAPAC, an ad hoc group, Local Leadership United, which is Provincial Community Action Initiative program that Councillor Elliott was recently at. And then just other ideas. There's Chamber of Commerce. I'm not promoting these, it's just trying to prompt discussion. Island Coastal Economic Trust, and of course there's various associations and societies throughout town, as well as others. So on these, what we could do is workshop it after, if you want me to keep going, or do you want to talk about different committees now? In addition, when I bring the next version back, if you want me to, there's always opportunity to email as well for further discussion.
Councillor Isaacs.
I would rather than getting into organizations right now, I would rather speak about like the intention of the overall policy, because things might change based on that conversation. I'm curious what we end up talking about. I see Councillor Dowd has got his hand up.
Councillor Dowd's on the screen, Your Worship.
Oh, in the corner, sorry. Councillor Dowd.
Hi, how you doing? I've got a couple of comments, and I'll just dive right into what I've been thinking about here.
Can you speak into your microphone, Councillor Dowd? It's hard to hear.
Let's see how close I can get. I'll back up. Sunshine Coast Tourism that's on the list is number 4, is really the Sunshine Coast Tourism Northern Advisory Committee. And I'm just saying this because I think with all these things, it's really important to actually have the real name of the group so that people understand who they're liaising with. I've spoken to people in town site who really very much want a representative or a liaison with council on the town site heritage committee. They thought they had one and they want to have one. I'm looking at the Island Coastal Economic Trust, and I just looked up their 2021 to 2022 annual report this year. They have a board and they have a regional advisory committee, and the regional advisory committee for the Cathett area includes the chair of the regional district and the mayor of the city. So I believe that Mayor Wasno is already a representative on the Island Coastal Trust Advisory Committee, and the board itself, I think, is appointed by the legislature. Just those comments. I sit on the Community Advisory Committee for Supported Housing for the regional district, about the Social Action Planning Advisory Committee, etc. for LIFT. I don't know if they're active or who's on it, but I really think having the real names of these groups is important so that people understand what it is they're participating in.
Thank you, Councillor Almeida.
Thank you, Worship. Just a small note, Councillor Dowd had mentioned the Townsite Heritage Society. As Heritage was originally in my portfolio, that group actually reached out to me, and I joined in one of their meetings just a couple of weeks ago. And the Townsite Heritage works really closely hand in hand with Tourism Powell River. And in fact, half of the Townsite Heritage Board is also part of the Tourism Powell River Board. So I am happy to continue in that role with Townsite Heritage if we're making that official.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. So the conversation should probably focus a little bit on the principles first, but I agree with Councillor Doubt. We want to make sure our names are correct. For example, Community Futures Development Corporation, not committee. They're not a committee, they're a corporation. And they have a board and we have a liaison there that's official. Many of the ones on the list are ones that I've been participating in, and I let my interests be known during the development process that these are all groups I'm worried about perhaps having liaisons, perhaps not, but I currently sit on just about, well, most of them. The Cathette Community Action Team, I go there. The Community Advisory Committee for Supportive Housing, I go there. Social Action Planning Advisory Committee is one that hasn't met this term at all, but we used to have it as a intergovernmental one with people from Cathette, people from and people from the city to coordinate and discuss social action initiatives. And so that was formed through our intergovernmental relations and protocol agreements, and it overseen the social planner, which was funded as a social initiative from all three governments. So we haven't had a social planner this term yet, and we haven't had any meetings yet, but that was one that I was involved with through the portfolio system. But we would change it, I guess, under this system to formal appointments to various groups. The Local Leadership United is a community and action initiative from the BC government and is linked to the community action teams in each of the communities. I'm really happy to be there. The Chamber of Commerce is one we do not currently have a liaison with, but I thought it was a good idea, so I threw it on the list. I also thought that we do a lot of communication with our ratepayers and so forth, and thought it'd be a good idea to have a process that allows them to ask for a liaison if they want one. And so that brings us to the process outlined above. And I'm in favor of the process where communities can ask us for liaison if that's what they want. I'm also kind of thinking this is specific to community liaison, and what we kind of need is an overarching policy that talks about the various avenues communities can have access to council, so they can choose the one that best suits their purpose, and with a small description of perhaps a community liaison, perhaps it's correspondence, perhaps it's a delegation, and all the ways that you can utilize these different avenues. So that would be kind of a header document with policies to support each of the pieces if we need them, or legislation or whatever it is we're requiring.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Southcott.
Thank you, Worship. I have about at least 10 questions to start with, which I'm not going to start with, because the only real question that I have is the question that Councillor Isaacson brought up, and that is, and we seem to be workshopping this now already, but the details, the 10 questions I have are just to start with, and that's going to lead to at least that many more. And there's obviously a real process here that there are questions, I'm sure, that if you added them up amongst the works of us, would come up around almost every single organization on your list here, Mr. Jackson, as well as other questions that I have and that I'm sure others of us would have. So I wondered if maybe we could return to just consideration of the policy itself, which is really simple. This just, unless we are going to workshop this now, and there's lots of specifics to question, because I do have one or two questions that get back to basically the policy itself suggested, which I really like, by the way.
Mr. Jackson, would you like to address the policy?
Sure, through your worship. So absolutely. If I jumped in too soon to the potential community groups to add, yeah, the big elephant in the room is, well, do you even want to go in this direction? Right. And that's why I provided the content of what a policy could be. So if you'd like to just discuss that, absolutely, I'm here for you. Whatever you'd like to do.
Councillor Southside.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just to continue, in conversations that you and I had over years, this is kind of a direction that it feels like we were headed. The major change of the strategic direction of making the CAO the single employee and the funnel through which everything proceeds is so simplifies our process right now, in my view. So I really welcome that, and I welcome this policy. Just have a couple of little questions, maybe just one actually to start with, because I only really got started tearing it apart at home. And that is community groups point 3, or the section 3. I wondered if, because it will be kind of a living document, it might be good to include language, those community groups identified in, but not limited to those listed in Schedule A necessarily, so that we could make changes on the fly without it being inconsistent with the policy with that particular section, which refers to Schedule A. That's about the only real question I have as far as the policy goes itself. The rest of it I really like the looks of. I think it's very functional, simple, and makes it easy for us to get into the details. Thank you. So that was just a thought. It was just something I wrote down, and I'm just wondering if it makes sense.
Thank you. Councillor Isaacson.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to echo what Councillor Elliott said. I think I would love to see this as part of a package where we make clear to community groups what are the various avenues to connect with council. And I wouldn't want this to feel like this for them to feel like this was the only avenue. I do not want to be a liaison to 20 organizations and be invited to attend all their meetings and for them to be disappointed when I don't. So that's just me being quite frank. So I don't know if that means broadening up this policy to be more of a broader council community group connection policy and having subheadings, because obviously our delegation policies, not a delegation of decision making, but delegations attending council is beyond community groups. And so I don't know the best way to, like, that's for you to sort out where it's best, but perhaps in the preamble or purpose, talking about how in addition to other avenues. One thing, I don't know if I missed it here. So groups can request, and I'm curious, is the intention that they can request a specific counselor? Would it count, like, how would we make, facilitate the actual connection and determine? So if someone has a specific counselor in mind, can they request? Does it go out to all council and we volunteer and vote to appoint? I'm curious about that.
We have,
would you like to answer that?
Yeah.
Certainly, Your Worship. So what I envisioned is just a request would be something like a letter with accompanying background. So council can collectively determine who the best counselor to that position would be. Perhaps your interests, your workload, the timing, the mandate, etc. I'm sure that they could request an individual. Of course, nobody would ever stop them. And but it's up to you in the end through majority vote whom to assign.
Okay, thank you. And so, like, I would expect for certain groups, it makes sense for the mayor to be a liaison if they're quite substantial in nature. And so I'm curious if there are groups that wouldn't be on this list because they naturally fall with the mayor, or maybe that is included in this policy. That's another thing that maybe needs clarity. Are there groups where the mayor is like the de facto liaison and should be? And in terms of types of groups to especially encourage, when I think about all the different ways that residents and community groups can connect with council, I see this as an opportunity for groups who maybe would have trouble navigating city bureaucracy and don't have clear access to power and are not used to asserting themselves. And so in some cases that might involve youth groups or a particular interest of mine to have some liaisons, but that can also happen informally. So I'm not too sticky on that. I think having a liaison with the Arts Council would be, I guess, just a random throw out there of another group that might be relevant to add. Like overall, I'm supportive of this. I just hesitate. I don't want the list to be 100 organizations long and everybody wants a council liaison. And so I think it would maybe it's a conversation for us. Like, are there groups that we want to focus on first, or what would be the rationales to decline a request and suggest that they go in a different avenue, just so that if we don't disappoint people if we say no, because I cannot attend 20 groups meetings, even though it's not expected, it's mentioned in there.
Mr. Jackson, do you have a recommendation on how we should proceed?
Well, this is a living policy. So as we learn over time, we'll get those lessons and we can adjust the policy as required. Right now, it's written in a manner to imply, I guess, some criteria that we'd be looking for from a community group and set those expectations in advance so that you would have the rationale. So if it's a community group that maybe meets once a year, they could come to council perhaps. Mm-hmm. They could give an ask in that way. Or if it's, I guess, if it's related to an organization where they're not really fully up to date, they're not quite sophisticated, not in terms of their mandate, but they're just not organized. Right. And maybe council wants to say, well, I'm not sure whether we want to really be part of that organization until they've fully figured out their mandate, because they may want to just have a liaison to apply for a grant or something. Right. So you'll need to sort that out over time. But I think it's wise to set those expectations. And in the policy, it is referenced a bit with the impact of the appointment on the city's ability to deliver on corporate strategic priorities. And it doesn't say specifically council, it says cities. So there was written deliberately that way, so it would be including staff. Not that there would be a great deal of staff to support you in the liaison. It'd be very minimal, if any. However, when you are active on a group and it is completely outside of the strategic priorities that we already set for the organization, it may be wise to weigh that in the moment and say, well, we're actually going in this direction. And then maybe those organizations that are in the direction you want to go will come forward.
Okay. And what recommendation do you have in terms of proceeding with regard to the report you presented?
Well, what I'm looking for today, the ask is, when I finish the presentation, I'll wrap it up. But the idea is getting direction on bringing this version forward in a policy format with edits and changes that come from the table, as well as the, thank you, Councillor Doubt, to the correct names of some of the organizations, and Councillor Elliott, I want to forget you. But that could come forward in July. Yeah, if that's the will of council.
Okay.
Councillor Doubt's had his hand.
Councillor Doubt.
Yeah, thanks. There's just a few comments that come up. One is I see that item number 6 talks about council appointing, and I think council number 7 says the appointments will be done by majority vote. That seems to me to bring the issue of a liaison person to council for a decision by council about whether or not there should be a liaison appointed and who that person should be. So I think the policy as it's written there gives council control over those two decisions. Should there be a liaison and who should it be? It requires a majority of council to appoint somebody. So there we go from there on. I think the majority of the name, not the organizations on the list, are local organizations, but not all of them are. And I think we should spend some time thinking about how the costs of being a liaison to these committees are going to be apportioned. If they have meetings on Vancouver Island or Vancouver or Victoria or Seashell, where are the costs going to come from for those attendances and how are they going to be managed is something I think we should talk about. So that's my input right now. I think we've got a long list, and as having some experience as a liaison with Tourism Powell River, they were part of an economic development initiative by the city, and same with Sunshine Coast Tourism. It's actually part of the economic development portfolio, is encouraging tourism, and those things that are important to the city obviously should have a connection. And there's all kinds of opportunities there if there's a council member going to the meetings where they can communicate the interests of those groups back to council and have someone that hears them firsthand without that group coming continually as delegations to every meeting of council. Part of being a liaison, I would expect, is we're going to get a thorough report at council from those liaison people about what they are doing in each one of those places where they're connecting council to. So that's just a few thoughts, but I don't know. It sounds like some people might like to study this more and workshop it more.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'm very supportive of having a policy. So because if we're going to transition from a system that our community is super used to around portfolios and responsiveness and so forth, I think it's important we don't disappoint people we are already in contact with and working with. And so it might help to have a bit of a spreadsheet that includes all the work we're already doing through our portfolio connections, and whether they suit a liaison or some other type of connection. And so that we are all very clear in transition how we maintain responsiveness to our community where they have systems in place right now that are working for them, and we're proposing changes. We want that to affect communities as little as possible, and if possible, get better at it, right? So we want that overarching sort of, here's all the ways you can be connected to council, speak to them, get a response to them. There's various avenues. We want a bit of a spreadsheet that says currently, so these councillors are involved with these groups. Some of those might shift over to being liaisons. Some of them may shift to a different method, but we have a transition strategy and a way to communicate about that. So it isn't just about the policy, it's about understanding the transition strategy, the communication that goes along with it, and everybody that needs to be involved in that. So there's some policy and there's some implementation planning that includes a strategy, and we kind of need to develop them together because it's uncomfortable to decide on a policy if we don't know what the transition is going to look like. And my concern is that we don't disappoint our community members. We have I'm probably overloaded in my activity at this point in time, but I'm managing to do so, and I wouldn't want to let anyone down. I'm not saying I shouldn't continue those jobs. I'm just saying we're going to a different system. I have always responded to everybody within my portfolio area when they needed me or wanted me, and we're changing that. So I want them to know how to get the attention of council and who to talk to.
Thank you. Councillor Palm.
Mayor Mosno, through the chair, healthy discussion all around, changes in the winds. That's good to see. However, there are a couple of concerns I have. One, just looking at the community group potential here, there's can be a lot of involvement on a lot of various groups in town. I'd like to see that spread equally amongst council. So rather than individual committees asking for a certain councillor to participate, I'd like to see those requests come forward to council so that we can mull it over and make sure that the workload is spread out and we don't see any potential conflicts or interests get in the path. That's all I want to say on that, but I do have some concerns about reducing the number of meetings. that we have had in the past. Because what I'm hearing from the public is they are concerned about communication. Communication is always on their mind. And maybe right now they're not feeling like we're doing a great job because we haven't initiated our communication plan, which is still coming forward. And will be well received when it is, I'm sure. But until we do that, I want to give some consideration to, if we are abolishing the portfolio system, that we reword that. See, there are 7 portfolios listed on the existing governance policy. I would like to see a reference to communication or community communication counselor for each of those areas, not to meet with so much with a director, but to be a liaison to the community so that they have someone to contact. Because it's not always easy contacting staff in those various departments because they're very busy. And I see that as an important role because we are the liaison to the community. And I think that's a healthy approach. And it just gives the public somebody to go to immediately if they need be. Sort out problems, make CAO aware so he can pass on the message, and not the counselor running to the director, but going straight to the CAO to bring that concern forward from the public. So whatever way you want to do it, I see that as a benefit. I'm not sure what council thinks about it, but certainly talk about it.
Councillor Southcott.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question, and this reflects back to Councillor Elliott's, what I believe was a question. Would it be useful for staff to receive a list from us as to what we are already doing and what the community is no doubt going to continue to expect us to do, and which I am going to continue to do, and I'm sure a lot of us will, because the community's not changing, we are. We're just changing kind of how we're doing this and cleaning up policy as I see it, which I really like. So would it be, that's the question, would it be useful to write down a list and even, I know our governance, I'm going to leave it at that. Would that be useful?
Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Worship. Yes, it certainly would. So the first step is really a check-in with the decision makers. Are we going in the right direction as staff? Is this where you want to go? Okay, then let's start moving in that direction. We didn't want to get ahead of council because obviously that's not what we do. So that would be part of it, is having a spreadsheet, of spreadsheets, and circulate that to council. Each individual can reply, can talk about who you meet with, why that's important, what is their purpose, and that could come back to the council table and have a discussion about ongoing commitment. And with that, it would be useful to have the conversation about spreading it out. And what I'm hearing also is, it almost sounds like there's a generalist appointment that isn't specific to a community group, but to a theme or a topic. I think staff will have some comments on that at a future meeting, so you can have some information on the pros and cons of such a strategy. But I think the next step would include seeking what's already working, right? Not changing what's working, but confirming what's working.
Thank you. Councillor Isaacson.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to echo what Councillor Palm said. I really do like the liaison generalist role. And for me, it's all about like reducing barriers for community groups to contact council and make things less complicated. So, preface it by saying that they are welcome to contact anybody on council, but here are councillors and who have, who often focus or, reach out to groups in specific areas. And so, I'm not as experienced with the portfolio system, but I know that's a little bit of what I end up doing. And even if it's not an official portfolio right now, there's some areas where I tend to meet with people and get questions and inquiries from the public. So, I think the policy in general is in the right direction, but I think it's broader than specific organizations. And so I just want to Yeah, echo what Councillor Palm said.
Mr. Jackson, I'm going to ask council if there's a consensus that we follow your recommendation and start the process. And as Councillor Southcott said, we will all provide information to you. So is there a consensus?
Mr. Mayor, I've had my hand up for a little while on the screen. I know it's probably hard to see.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There's a right. Oh, now that's a lot easier. All right. Please, Councillor Doubt.
Yeah. And, you know, just listening to the previous conversation, the portfolio system gave us each councillor had a portfolio or more than one portfolio where they had constant communication on within some guidelines, at least monthly and bi-monthly consultations with staff in the portfolios that they handled. And they were entitled, in my understanding of the processes of council, to answer questions on what council had done. So they did that. And that, I understand, is what council decided not to have. Now, to suggest that we're not going to have portfolios, but we're going to have people that act like they have a portfolio. We need to have one or the other. Either we have somebody who's studying the infrastructure portfolio and has contact and can answer questions on that. Someone who has finance knowledge and connections with the CFO for discussing those things and can answer the questions, and we'll take the time to be ready. Or we can do the other choice, that everybody on council can respond individually to questions people got and tell them, this is my opinion. This is George Dout's opinion, not council's opinion, because he's speaking as individuals. I, for one, on another topic here, have met with people from the community every day this week and talked about council issues that are important to them. Okay, I'm not a liaison to any one of those, and every one of the people I talk to is probably in a group. I'm not a liaison to their groups, but I talk to people and they ask me questions and I give them the best answer I can from myself. If we try to list every group that every one of us around the table talks to and call that a duty of a councillor to speak to all of those groups, we're going to be really busy people. And, you know, what more are we going to offer them if we're in those roles? So my point is that I think we need to go create a list of things that we think it's important to send a councillor to the meetings to be in contact between council and the group. That means two-way communication. It can't be every group in town, or there will just not be enough councillors to go around and not enough nights of the week to go to all the meetings. So I think we got to be careful how widely we say we're going to liaison with everybody who wants to have a liaison door to council. I think we have to be very careful about not having people who have a vote in the group that they're being a liaison with, because we have lots of groups that are taking political action, and to have someone voting on a political action by a specific group and then coming to council and speaking for that group, I think becomes a conflict, my own personal opinion. If you don't have a vote there, if you're simply there to provide information back and forth, that's another story. I think we want to spend some time thinking about this, yes, and I don't think we should include every group that gets together in town as a list of people that need to have somebody as a liaison. So I think there's more work to do, and look forward to hearing everybody else's opinions.
Mr. Day.
I think one of the important things that we heard today is the whether it be a policy or informational piece about how the different means that people can get a hold of council. And I think that if we have that laid out, then it hopefully will balance the burden on council about these formal liaison positions. So we'll take the suggestions. Basically, I think we almost heard that from everybody in one form or another about how that informational piece is like outlining every means that a group or individual has of contacting council. It should simplify the number of liaisons possible as we provide other options to them.
Thank you. Councillor Southcott.
Thank you, Mayor. Just here's a question. Would you like me to read the recommendation, or are we sending this back to staff for more work? It's not clear to me.
Perhaps we could, Mayor, just do a timeout on that one. And there's a motion at the end, and I can, we can adjust that at that time. I can write that down. I could I maybe finish the presentation if we're done with that? That's okay.
Yep, please.
But there's more.
But wait, does it also cut tin cans?
So this would, if you create a new, if you create this new liaison appointment policy, then the council governance policy would no longer apply. And that would be in four different areas. One, the internal portfolio system, and that's specific to internal, not external. That's what we're working on, is the external. It wouldn't be required. The new policy would contain the provisions that already exist regarding liaison in the current policy. New policy provisions that relate to staffing would just by default move into the delegation bylaw, the officer's designation bylaw. So that'll be taken care of. And all the remaining provisions within the larger governance policy, they're largely redundant because they mirror what is in provincial law. It's not a bad thing. It's good for education. It's right there. But the provincial law would always supersede the policy anyways. So that isn't a necessary component. So a couple other things with governance. So going forward, as Councillor Palm alluded to, what would happen with the changes to the meetings structure and the requirement to change the procedure bylaw to affect that? Well, looking forward the next few months, you're already full. The summer schedule requires, or sorry, it wasn't required, but it was reduced anyway. So you have 2 council meetings in the summer, and you already have 2 regular committee of the whole meetings. We're not suggesting to get rid of those because we need special anyway. So just keep the same meeting schedule you have. The change would be in how those meetings operate. So committee of the whole meetings will always include, just as the council meetings will always include a public delegation component. Always, 100%. No one, I think, has ever mentioned that you would like to see a change in that direction. Staff are not suggesting those changes at all. But the limited number of staff, there'll be a limited number of staff reports coming to committee of the whole. The idea is those matters that are complex, they need a bit more robust discussion at the table. That's what we're going to focus on. So you have more time to focus on those complicated ones. And then the remainder go to the council meeting where you could either make a decision at that time, or it's an icebreaker. You hear it, it's introduced as a topic, and you refer it to the next council meeting in a couple of weeks. So the schedule, we're not looking to change because it's already, I think, at a good practice. There's also going to be a couple special meetings added on, likely. The committee of the whole, for example, in July, that's the strat plan. You're workshopping that. And I believe in August, we're looking at the financial plan. Yes. So yeah, you've got some heavy lifting coming up.
I just have a question. Are we still doing questions as we go, or are we waiting?
Except I'm fine.
Thank you. So one of the things that just kind of enters my head and worries me a tiny bit is we may consider something quite simple and not in need of going to committee of the whole, but it may generate public interest, and the public may feel put out that they don't have the additional time to think about stuff, learn about stuff, think about stuff, and provide comment because it didn't come up at a committee of the whole first. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering how we foresee that aspect of community engagement working in this system.
So, to your worship, so on Friday, the agendas are published, and that gives until the Thursday night for any member of the public who probably didn't know. Well, they would have known what's going to be published, but now that they've read it on the weekend, well, they have something to say. And I think that'll become self-evident that when you enter your council meeting on Thursday, you'll see, wow, there's quite a bit of interest in this, more than we thought. So I'm okay with staff giving the introduction to the report and some of the layout, but we're not ready to make a decision tonight. And absolutely, that's your right to say, no, we're not ready tonight to make that decision. We would like to have it maybe an engagement strategy or give it referred to as that sober second thought for a couple of weeks later, and have it come back when you've got a chance for other people to come to sign up as a delegation. Also looking at the procedure bylaw at the staff level, we're thinking of different ways in which someone may not need to sign up as a delegation, but there's a public comment opportunity prior to you making decisions. So maybe that'd be 1 or 2 people, but if you have 30, well, you've got to time out on and change the approach.
Great follow-up, Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, so over at the regional district, we do have less meetings, so it's very similar to what you're proposing here. And we take unregistered delegations for things that are on the agenda only. And is that possible here at the city too? Because we haven't been doing that, and that may alleviate that concern I'm worried about, is if people see something on the agenda, they could show up and be an unregistered delegation to speak to that item only. And that might help.
Yes, so that'd be one of the options that we're bringing back, is whether you want to limit that for time or not limit it. It's going to be part of the procedure bylaw review. The reason why we have to go governance first, and then I'm suggesting delegation bylaw and officer bylaw, because the changes you make there will feed into what you want to do with the procedure bylaw. And given that you already have the summer schedule laid out, we have a small window of opportunity here to work on those other ones, and then make sure that the options that are coming forward with the procedure bylaw, like you're suggesting, Councillor Elliott, with an opportunity for public comment prior to items on the agenda, will be taken care of and into consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. I don't see any hands up. Oh,
Yeah, there's one.
Can you just so I can find out why I can't see your hand? Could you raise your hand? Pull that tiny little, not visible. All right. Thank you.
I'm not responsible for the technology. All I can do is try to work.
Councillor Doubt.
So I understand that the suggestion now in this report is that we will have committee of the whole meetings in July 11th and August 15th. I'm not sure what the intention was about the August 24th Finance Committee. Is that still going to happen, or is that going to be done in a committee of the whole?
Mr. Jackson?
That's on the next slide, I believe. Your Worship?
On the presentation, yeah.
Next slide, or the next 2 slides. If you'd like me to jump to that.
Please.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
Because it's a good question. And we need to cover that. So the next one, okay, Finance Committee. So in alignment with the new governance changes, Finance Committee could be dissolved. So then all matters that would be dealt with at the Finance Committee would of course come forward to Council or the Committee of the Whole meetings. And an example of that is the financial plan budgeting. So you wouldn't lose the opportunity in a Finance Committee discussion. It would just appear at the Committee of the Whole, as we just mentioned. So yes, the intent would be no more finance, so we could just wipe the books from that and refocus them into the other meeting channels. And then the next one here, I'm suggesting.
Excuse me a minute, Councillor Doubt, we're hearing some strange sounds. Can you mute when you're not talking?
I'm hearing strange sounds too. Yes, I will mute.
You're a squeaky chair, dude.
Okay. Sorry, Mr. Jackson.
I thought he was referring to me. Okay. Oh, I've been told that before. So, delegation of authority, appeal processes, officer designations. This is through delegation bylaw. Council has the authority to assign staff, other members of council, certain duties, functions, and perform some responsibilities. So the delegation bylaw it's ready for a refresh. I think it should be more, if I could be so bold, it should have more clarity of authority, establish an effective public appeal process for delegates' decisions. So in some situations, delegates, I'll try and avoid the word delegate because I think Councillor Isaac pointed out before, are we talking about delegation of council or are we talking about delegated authority? And that's true, same word. I'm confusing Councillor Palm. So for the delegation of authority, what that's just referring to is if you instruct the CAO or the CFO, corporate officer, the mayor to sign when we receive grants from external organizations where it's already been passed by the financial plan, right? So rather than bringing everything to council, you've delegated some of that authority so we could affect it. There are other things such as some strange ones like assignment of mailing addresses. So when the building inspector does the permitting process, they assign a mailing address. There's actually a provision in a bylaw saying, well, if somebody doesn't like that, they can appeal to council. So some of them, you got to wonder, is that an effective use of time or is that not? What we'd like to do is have it absolutely abundantly clear, laid out how folks can seek council appeal when they disagree with the staff decision. I think that's a fundamental administrative and procedural fairness mechanism. So I'm spending a lot of time on that. We'll be including that. The next one is defining some of the roles and responsibilities. There's a few bylaws out there. I'm just suggesting we consolidate them or amalgamate them into a new one. And that includes the CAO, corporate officer, CFO. There's a standalone bylaw for them because they're legislated officer positions of the city. So we can combine it and just reduce the number of just general bylaws we have. I think it's just more effective when we have less. So should council move forward with the new liaison policy, then that's where we're going to start turning our mind to the next steps. So the recommendations in the report is that the Finance Committee be dissolved, staff be directed to prepare the new liaison policy for consideration based on the version in here. And I say based on because there were suggested changes, so you'll see those. Prepare a draft resolution that would repeal the governance policy and provide options, prepare amendments to the next step, the delegation bylaw, officers bylaw, and concurrently establish bylaw provisions for the appeal process to be included. So what I would take from direction as well is, of course, the implementation of it. And as the CAO pointed out, we'd have like the preamble, have a clear communications path in terms of how people could get a hold of counselors. So what I envision is that coming forward so you see it along with the new version of the policy, which at that time, then you would consider the governance policy being repealed. So these are the recommendations, should you so choose.
Okay. Councillor Elliott and then Councillor Palm.
So I like the recommendations. I'm wondering, I don't think there's any changes we need to make to the recommendations based on all of our conversation today, but just that there's going to be more interaction maybe with some exchange of information and refining of implementation strategies and planning, including communications with our current folks in how, if there's anything going to affect them at all. So that's just my comment.
Councillor Palm, before we move to you, can we have a motion? Okay, thank you. Councillor Elliott?
I move the recommendations in the package. Should I read them?
I just read them, so if they're identical, then the mover.
Right. And do we have a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Palm.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to try to put the new delegation bylaw policy that you just outlined into perspective on a operating basis. So let's use a couple of examples here recently. One, not too long ago, we had a number of people from the harbor come wanting a committee to be set up. And that's somewhere on a staff desk, yet waiting to come back to this table. And there's no communication going to that group as far as I'm concerned. The other one is, let's use Moet Bay, where we had a delegation come in and say, what kind of safety and security measures are you going to put into Moet Bay so that it's safe for parking there as we go up the lake to our cabins? That one as well, it's on somebody's table. There's no communication, and that delegation is left blowing in the wind. So how would this new policy address the communication aspects of those?
So through your worship, so this particular one wouldn't, but there is another initiative underway where we're looking at internal, external communications. And part of that is, one of the ideas is like having a weekly or bi-weekly communications update, activity update. So that would include things like there was a delegation, there was a decision made, this is the status of the action, so that you could keep track of that, it doesn't get lost. So that would be something circulated to council, likely posted to the website. I don't see why not, unless they're in camera, of course. But it would be separate to this, to the delegation bylaw itself. Different subject. So.
Thank you, Councillor Isaacson.
Thank you, Mayor. My only request is when you prepare for the third bullet, is there a way to never say delegation and instead use the phrase delegated authority so that people don't confuse the matter? Because they're very different.
Words matter. Yes, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Almeida.
Thank you, Your Worship. Two thoughts. Because actually, when you started talking about delegation bylaw, my head went to delegations that come to council. And so this first question might not be related to what you're discussing today. But at some point, it reminded me of a thought that came to my head or someone suggested some time ago and this is more for preventative than anything else. There might be times down the road that certain topics come up that take some time to work their way through council and get multiple readings over a period of a few months. Right now, I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe we have any sort of policy that would prevent a delegation from coming to talk about the same topic multiple times. So I don't know if this would have to do with that, but that might be something just to put in there of some sort of limit of 2 or something to repeat some people from abusing the right to be delegation privilege. So just a thought. My second thought is, again, you haven't talked about it today, but I imagine there's going to be a shift in our fall meeting schedule. And I can understand why we wouldn't want to shift the summer schedule significantly as we've planned around that. But as we're moving forward, and I think the CAO is already kind of leaning towards this, I imagine we might be shifting the idea of having a committee meeting on the same week as a council meeting, because that'll be a heavy meeting week, and spreading them out over alternating weeks or something, I guess.
That's part of it. That's the idea, is that we really only have regular councils. However, the question would be, well, what else are you going to do in addition to that? And that's what's got to be sorted out by council and brought forward. If it's a regular that you plan on every opposite week, or whether it's once a month, or whether that's too much, and we just have special when there's a complicated and complex project that's at hand.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Mr. Day.
Just to add to that, that's one of the discussions we want to have with council in terms of how they want to set up. It's your meeting, so how you want to set that up. And I think, one of the frustrations I hear from council is kind of the slow progress of moving things through. And so I think we do need a regular occurrence of meetings, but we just don't want to have the same topic on, 2 or 3 agendas, unless, of course, if they are, have a lot of community interest in it. And so we're going to bring that back to you in terms of what those meetings might look like, times that work for you, and in particular, different circumstances, like, so just as an example, in previous place of employment, we had in-camera meetings that started at 5:30, provide a couple sandwiches on the night that you had a public meeting. So basically you had a day committed, and we would, deal with some of the difficult issues really early, and then go to the council meeting at 7, so that you got one night committed. So we want to have that dialogue with you and see what fits your schedule and what fits your interest. And so we're going to bring that forward over the next few weeks.
Thank you, Councillor Dodd. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to make the comment, because it keeps coming up over and over again, is that a lot of people in the community don't read our agendas. They're exciting agendas, but people don't go to the city website on the Friday before the meeting and read them. They usually wait until there's a committee of the whole meeting, hear the debate, hear the reaction to that debate. Sometimes it's a story on Facebook, sometimes it's a story in the Peak, and they react to that, and they go to the next council meeting to make their opinion held. That we want to be careful when we're trying to make sure we hear things one time at a council meeting and make a decision, that we're prepared for the community reaction when they read what council has decided to do. Because there will be many, in my estimation, who say this happened without anybody knowing about it, and why didn't you tell us what was going on? And that's something I think we need to consider, and we need to look at how we're going to find ways to communicate to people what council is planning to do if we're going to eliminate serious steps in the discussion and go right to a decision. And putting it off till 2 weeks away or till next month is not always a good choice.
Thank you. I'm confident that our CEO Day has seen this work effectively in other communities, and there's effective ways of communicating, so we'll move forward. Councillor Isaacson.
Yeah, I feel like we're getting onto this potential procedures bylaw update that's not in front of us. And so I was wondering if debate's over, we can call the question, which doesn't have to do with the procedure bylaw.
All right, all in favor of the motion on the floor? Any opposed? Passed. Sorry, Councillor Doubt, are you opposing, or was it a?
Delayed.
I was in favor. There is a delay, apparently.
Okay, thank you very much. Passed unanimously. Thank you. Councillor Elliott?
Thank you. I did want to just put a brief comment on the CAO Day's thoughts about our conversation here. I would be in favor of a system that had one regular committee of the whole every month. And I would also be in favor of a system that that restricted delegations of council meetings to the subjects that are on the agenda. And delegations that are maybe not agenda specific be done at committee of the whole. So that, because we usually have more time to consider people coming in and doing their delegations and having that conversation at a committee of the whole. And if we're having less items on the committee of the whole, that would be where we could hear from the community the delegations that they want to bring to us. I think that our council meetings that start at 7 in the evening so that we can be accessible to everybody probably shouldn't have big, long delegates that aren't related to the decisions at hand on that meeting. So those are just my thoughts around that.
Thank you. We'll now move to item 3, which is a motion to go on camera. We have Councillor Almeida.
Thank you, Your Worship. I move that following adjournment of this regular meeting, council move to a closed meeting to discuss matters covered by the community charter under sections 91. A, personal information about an identifiable individual who is being considered for a position as an officer of the municipality. G, litigation or potential litigation affecting the municipality. I, the receipt of advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. And N, the consideration of whether a council meeting should be closed under a provision of this section, subsection or subsection 2.
Seconder. Seconded by Councillor Southcott. Any discussion? All in favor? Passed unanimously. Do we have any questions from the audience? Mr. Galinsky.
Thanks, Your Worship. Through the chair, I have a couple of requests of the corporate officer. I'm wondering if the corporate officer can send me a copy of his excellent PowerPoint presentation. And also, I'm wondering if he can send me a copy of the motion that was adopted unanimously here at the special council meeting.
Mr. Jackson is nodding yes.
I see the nodding, so thank you very much. I appreciate that, Your Worship, and the corporate officer.
Thank you. Do we have any questions online? Do we have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Almeida, seconded by Councillor Isaacson. All in favor? Passed unanimously.
Yeah.